So, for those of you who attended that very interesting talk by one of your members, James Hunt, from a few months ago, you may be aware, given my comments during that talk, that I'm an evolutionary biologist by training. Anthropology in the United States has 3 subfields. Cultural anthropology deals with extant living cultures and their social systems. Archaeology is, in a sense, cultural anthropology of extinct societies, trying to reconstruct past lifeways of societies that no longer exist, although the descendants are still around, oftentimes. And my subfield, biological anthropology, deals with all biological aspects of what it means to be human. And within biological anthropology, my subdiscipline is on the molecular biology, biochemical genetic side of the field. I've done molecular systematics of a variety of species, including primates. I've done both free-ranging and captive non-human primate studies. My doctoral dissertation was on the biochemical genetics of alcoholism, trying to elucidate the genetic causation in a subset of people called alcoholics. And so you may be wondering why someone like me is giving a talk that's purely embedded in the cultural anthropological subfield. And the history of that is, although I began teaching at San José State in 87, 88, in 88 I was chosen as part of the student recommended faculty program at UC Irvine to teach primate classes, and I taught at UC Irvine from 88 to 90. And when I came back to San Jose State in 1990 to teach largely biological anthropology classes, I teach 13 courses, 12 upper division, human origins, primate behavior, human genetics, and because of an undergraduate focus, also some archaeology, particularly Mesoamerican archaeology, I was asked for the first time to teach a course in the department known as human sexuality, which covers the biological and cultural aspects of sexuality. And although I knew the biological aspects, I was not very well versed in the cultural. And so that summer before, somebody who came back to San Jose State from SF State in 88, and had been teaching since 88, Kathy Zaretsky, sitting in the back, Professor Zaretsky, retired from that department. We met over that summer, and she'd been teaching the course, and we talked about it. And then by the end of that fall semester back, we were living together, and we've been married for 26 years. And it's basically because of teaching that class, which I've taught now over 60 times, and discussions with my wife, a cultural anthropologist that an interest in, because anthropology is a holistic field. I command this better than most biological anthropologists do. So it's important at the beginning to understand that there is a distinction between the word sex and gender. And when I teach this course, which I've taught probably more than any other class I've taught at San Jose State, I start with 3 lectures on religious attitudes towards sexuality, because unless you understand that, unless you understand the particular strand of Protestant Christianity that gained a foothold in the United States because of the European colonialists who managed to sell the United States, a lot of our students these days are mistaken because they see the ubiquitous ads for, use sexuality, well, not sexuality, a particular heterosexual construction of female sexuality, to sell everything from, blue jeans to Jeeps, et cetera. I think that we live in a very sexually liberated society, and that's not actually the case. Anthropologists, the virtue of cultural anthropology is that if you're trying to determine whether something is specific to a particular culture or is in fact universal to the human condition, the only way you can elucidate that is to do a cross-cultural analysis. And anthropologists have done this, and there's a spectrum of what are called sex-positive societies and sex-negative societies, and by all objective measures, U.S. mainstream society falls decidedly on the sex-negative side of that field. And it's for that reason that we tend to conflate the term sex and gender. It's not uncommon for many applications to ask for your gender when, trust me, they're not concerned about how masculine or feminine you are. They want to know about your biological sex. But sex is so angst-ridden in our society that we have a difficult time even using the word sex when that's what we're interested in asking about. So sex refers to the biological, the underlying, the pointer doesn't work on a LCD screen, apparently, it turns out. So sex refers to the biological attributes. And as a consequence, why is this not working? As a consequence, sex terms are terms like female, male, and then sex is a category that typically is thought of as being binary. One is born either chromosomally, genetically, external genital, internal genital, male or female. If you're interested in how non-binary the biological category of sex actually is, which is now covered by a cover term called intersex, you can invite me back and I'll give you a completely different lecture on embryological development and sex differentiation, including errors or variants in normal differentiation and all the pseudo-hermaphroditic conditions. That's a different talk, but just to point out that sex is not nearly as binary as we like to think it is. So it's thought to be binary, and there's little to no variability cross-culturally. Most societies cross-culturally recognize the same two sort of binary categories of sex that we do. Somebody's either born male or is born female. Although there are some exceptions to that rule, but they tend to be temporary exceptions having to do with a condition known as 5-alpha reductase deficiency, which I could talk about in that other talk that I'm not giving today. Gender, on the other hand, refers to the psychosocial aspects or attributes that are culturally constructed, and as a consequence of being culturally constructed, the sorts of behaviors and manners and dress and comportment that go along with in that society being female or being male. Gender varies dramatically, right? And in a two-gender society such as our own, gender terms are not male and female. They're terms like man, woman, girl, boy, and then, because of recent changes in our society, transgender. But so it's important to know at the outset that when I use the term male and female, I'm referring to biological sex. When I use the term man and woman, I'm using terms that refer to gender, which is not rooted in biology. It has to do with psychological, social aspects that normally correspond. And gender, unlike sex, well, actually not as unlike sex as one might imagine, given what I said previously, but most people understand that gender exists along a continuum, right? You have hyper-feminine in any society, that what is considered to be hyper-feminine behavior. You have hyper-masculine behavior. Most people are are not at that extreme, right? There are people that are frankly androgynous in their behavior, who are kind of in the middle. And I'm sure most of us know some biological females who are far more masculine in presentation of self than some biological males we know. I certainly do. And we also probably know some biological males who are more feminine in presentation of self than some biological females we know. And so gender refers to those non-biologically rooted aspects of behavior, dress, manner, etc., that vary along a continuum, and they don't always correspond with biological sex. Most of the time they do. And so it exists along a continuum, and here's the thing that's difficult for most Americans to understand. Not only do I start first talking about religious attitudes to help my students understand why American mainstream society has the attitudes it has, but I also then have a cross-cultural, not related to third gender initially, to help my students understand these anthropological concepts of what constitutes ethnocentric thinking, what constitutes, in this context of this discussion, culture-bound thinking. And culture-bound thinking is ubiquitous cross-culturally, because all humans are raised in a certain culture. We are rarely explicitly taught cultural norms. Just by being socialized, we accumulate them. I mean, such basic things as, what is considered food, right? I mean, to how many people is dog food, right? I mean, dog is pet in our society, right? But there are many societies where dog is considered food, right? If you were raised Muslim or an observant Jew, the meat of pig would not be considered food, right? But for others, it is, right? If you were raised Hindu, beef would not be considered food. So culture is acquired usually non-explicitly. It doesn't require formal teaching, and includes such ways of constructing the social world as how many genders are there, right? And the U.S. is a two-gender society, and that's going to shape the way many of you in this room will initially at least try to understand when I get to third and fourth genders. Because there's a tendency, because we are all raised in a culture and we have a framework for understanding the world, to try to make sense of things by forcing it into the existing framework we hold in our heads. But I'm going to try to explain how the majority of societies worldwide don't recognize only two genders, man and woman, for adult humans. We know this from anthropological ethnographic studies. The majority of societies worldwide recognize three distinct genders, and they are co-equal genders, right? And a smaller percentage recognize four genders. So in that sense, American constructions of gender, which stem from Northern European constructions of gender, are a minority way of understanding gender worldwide. So in a two-gender society like our own, we recognize two biological sexes. You're either born female or male. And we recognize two genders. Somebody born biologically female, when they grow up, is gendered as a woman. Somebody who is born biologically male, when they reach adulthood, is gendered as a man. You know, until recently, there are very few exceptions to this. And this two-gender construction requires a third level of analysis, which we refer to as sexual orientation. So a woman can be either a straight woman, heterosexual woman, or she can be a lesbian woman if her erotic attraction is exclusively for other women, or she can be bisexual. But can we agree in this room that a lesbian or bisexual woman is a type of woman? Right? It's not a co-equal gender, right? In a similar fashion, a male, when he reaches adulthood, is a type of man. So he could be a straight man, heterosexual man, only interested in the opposite sex. He could be a gay man, exclusively interested in same-sex individuals, or it could be a bisexual man, but we agree that a gay male and a bisexual male are both types of men, right? That reinforces the notion that American society recognizes only two genders. And this is fine, there's nothing wrong with this. We'll be talking about cultural differences, cultural variability. One is not better than the other, they're just different ways of constructing reality. And in the majority of societies, as I said, most societies recognize the same two sex categories that we recognize. But as far as gender, they recognize three. The majority of societies, a female grows up and becomes a woman. And she's gendered as a woman because in small-scale societies, certainly women get married, families, the economic unit of production, and so all women get married. It has nothing to do with who they're erotically attracted to, but women don't have to be erotically attracted to men to get pregnant. We understand that, right? But males have two paths. They can grow up to be men in the majority of societies, or they can grow up to be a third gender, and it's a co-equal named third gender, and I'll give you a list of some known third gender names on a future slide. And then a smaller number have, in addition to a third gender, for biological males who are not gendered as men, they're not gendered as women, they're gendered as a co-equal third gender category. A smaller number of societies have a similar option for females. They can grow up to be women, or they can grow up to be somebody who is gendered not as a woman nor as a man, but as a co-equal fourth gender. And so the majority of societies recognize three, not two. And there are also many more three-gender societies and four-gender societies. And as far as we are aware from ethnographic research, there are no four-gender societies that also recognize three. So the majority have three genders. Kathy, would it be fair to say that the second largest have four genders and the third largest have two? Or do we have any way of...
I never thought of that way, so I don't know.
Yeah. Okay, so here are some third gender terms. So among the Mojave, you have males who are not gendered as men. There are Liha, among Navajo, Nadle. On the Zapotec in Oaxaca area of Mexico, you have Mushe. In Mexico, there's a variety of terms, Joto, Jota, Puñal, Maricon. Nicaragua, you have Cachone. Samoa, you have Fafafine. Hawaii, Mahu. Tahiti, Role. Northern Philippines, Bakla. Southern Philippines, Bantut. Oh, you didn't put the Visayan here. Oh, the Visayan Islands, like Cebu and the Central Islands, Bakot, I think, is the third gender term. And so these are a variety of co-equal terms. In South Asia, India, and Pakistan, you have Hijaras. In Southeast Asia, Cambodia, Laos, Thailand, you have Katoys. Vietnam, you have Ai Nam or Bae Day. And the important thing to understand is that these are all people that are biologically male. They're not gendered as men. They're gendered as a co-equal gender category that is neither man nor woman. And the important thing to understand is, and one way to understand the difference, because of U.S. cultural hegemony, especially those countries that have had a great deal of U.S. influence, like Southeast Asia since the Vietnam War, increasingly South Asia, parts of Latin America, you'll hear the term gay used by such individuals. And you'll hear the U.S. term gay used to describe individuals. But if you delve deeper, you'll realize it's not what we mean by gay. In U.S. society, who does a gay male, if he has sex, have sex with? But what kind of man? A gay man, right? Gay males in a two-gender society, if they have sex with other gay males. In a three-gender society, if a third-gender male has sex, the last person in the world that third-gender male would have sex with would be another third-gender male. If a third-gender male has sex in a three-gender society, they have sex with a man, not a third-gender male. That would be seen as disgusting. There's an ethnographic film of Fa'afafines in Samoa where one Fa'afafine, when asked this by the interviewer, says, being sexual with another Fa'afafine would be like sleeping with your sister. I mean, it's totally out of their ken. Okay? And here's some fourth-gender terms. So in Tagalog, Northern Philippines, tomboys or T-birds. Ilocano, which is also Luzon. Linalaki, Japan, Anabi, Hausa, which is Nigeria. Danaudu, and they have a similar term, but not identical from the previous slide for the more common third-gender males. In Samoa, females who are not women are Fa'atama, whereas males who are not men are Fa'afafine. Navajo are Diba, whereas the males are Nodle, if they're not men. On the Blackfoot, the manly-hearted woman, it's a Nina Poskachipe or something. Anyway, it's hard for me to pronounce Blackfoot. I wish there was a slide of Albanian sworn virgins, Bernesha, which is dying out, but that's a particular category of fourth-gender females. And so there's fewer societies that recognize a fourth gender, and all the societies that I've listed here that have recognized a fourth co-equal gender for biological females who are not gendered as women also have a third gender category for males not gendered as men. But there are many more third gender societies which don't recognize a fourth gender. And so in two gender societies, sexual orientation is based on erotic attraction, independent of acting on that attraction, right? If looking like me, I was only attracted to males, I would be categorized in our society as homosexual. Can we agree on that? Whether I engage in sex or not. If my sole erotic attraction was to males, I would be categorized as a gay male, right? So the construction in a two-gender society is who you have sex with. It's based on erotic attraction and or who you have sex with. In three-gender societies, the construction of somebody as not being a man or a woman is not related to sex. It's based on usually three aspects. Third gender males dress differently than men or women do in that society. It's not as different from man's dress than from women's dress, and so most people who aren't from that society might mistakenly believe that the third gender male, let's say a hijra in India, is dressed like an Indian woman, but my wife, who did field work for a year in India, can vouch that hijras are not dressed like any woman would dress, even though to the Western eye they look like they're dressed as women. They usually have a distinctive manner which is different than men and women from their society. One thing that interests me as a biological anthropologist is, I don't know how many of you have gay male friends, but the majority of my gay male friends are, compared to a lot of my straight friends, are quick, witty, funny, you know, kind of, and that's something which is interesting to me, shows up cross-culturally. So third gender males tend to have a much more brash manner than women from their society, generally speaking. Not always the case. Not in Samoa, but in India and Pakistan and other places they do. And there are oftentimes different occupational specializations that third-gender males find themselves in. In many small-scale societies, the shaman, the ritual religious health specialist, is oftentimes a third-gender male. Third-gender males, which are much more common than fourth-gender females, because they are seen as embodying both aspects of humanity, the male aspect and the female aspect, are oftentimes cross-culturally seen as imbued with more spiritual power than either men or women. How many of you saw the Dustin Hoffman movie Little Big Man about the Sioux? There was an actually fairly accurate ethnographic description of a Lakota third-gender male in that movie. And they oftentimes tend to be shaman. They tend to be dancers, performers. They tend to be caregivers for children and the elderly, either informally in the family or in a more formal sense. And in the Philippines and other places, hairdressing is a very common occupational specialty for third-gender males. I'd like to read to you, as far as the shaman aspect, one of the things that both my wife, when she taught this class, and I do before we ever give them the first lecture, is we have them fill out a card where they say where they're from, because we have a very multicultural campus at San José State, like 160 languages, spoken. And we always ask, what age do they leave their country of origin? And this is to forestall somebody who, let's say, was born in Vietnam or born in El Salvador, disputing our description of their society's construction of gender. And, if they left when they were 3, sexuality in general is not a topic that children learn. You don't learn that until you're adult. And so it helps forestall those kind of things. But here's, this is from '99, after I'd given my lecture on third genders, which I take several lectures to do. I'm truncating it here. It says, "Hi, Jonathan. I'm in your Section 6 Human Sexuality class and would like to add something to your last lecture about third genders in Southeast Asia. The call for it is I Nam. The accent is on top of the letter I. I means neither or in between. Nam means male." This was a Vietnamese female student. No, a male student, sorry. "I have a little cousin 2 years younger than me who was an I Nam. Of course, at that time, I had no clue of the two-gender society in the West, and I actually didn't care. However, in Vietnamese society, people with this gender," notice the language, "people with this gender are often involved in witchcraft or shamanism practices. By choice or by cultural pressure, I don't know, probably both. One time he made a comment to me that, quote, 'My mom told me that I'd be a good shaman when I grow up. But I'm afraid of ghosts. I think she's wrong.' I didn't think anything of it until much later when we were in our teens. I noticed that he was really different from most of the boys. He liked to wear colorful clothing, playing with dolls, and was never involved in any active sports. He would go to the soccer game and watch me play, but he'd never want to touch the ball. I'm totally convinced that he was born that way because we were very close to each other, played everything together, and definitely we did not know anything about the concept of gay or homosexual until we reached our teens. I had to tell you this because the topic was so close to home for me." And so, third-gender males in societies that recognize three genders, it's part of the cultural landscape, right? And they usually are identified both by themselves and by their families while they're in childhood. They don't assume the culturally constructed third-gender role until they're adults, but the recognition happens in childhood by both themselves and their okay, I know the slides. And so I'll just tell you, for example, that one of the consequences of the majority of societies recognize three genders is that, there may be it's hard to know because of so much hegemony of cultural attitudes. Until recently, I've been very anti the very strict binary distinction between men and women and between, right? But even in those that have experienced a lot of U.S. cultural influence, there's mild derision, there's joking, but you don't find hijra bashing in India. You don't find Fa'afafine bashing in Samoa. You don't find mahu. Who's been to Hawaii? I'm willing to bet that at some of the restaurants you've been to, some of the waitresses have been mahu. Because third genders are pan-Polynesian. They're across all of Polynesia, Easter Island through Micronesia, Melanesia. It's through it. And in societies that don't just recognize two genders, there's a cultural space for people that are male who are not men, and they are incorporated into the fabric of the society.